Joe Morfeld here with Pine House Brewing in Austin, Texas, and I'm here with Craft Beer and Brewing's Tip of the Week. So we can talk about Hazy IPAs and our approach to them. There's a lot of carryover with how we approach Hazy IPAs from how I talked about doing some of our more modern West Coast. But there's some key differences that I want to illustrate. When we think about the hops in a lot of these Hazy IPAs, the big thing we want to think about is the biotransformative effect in these hops. So this is where it's a good time to get away from some of those more classic varieties that might be oil driven or might have some of the more traditional characteristics. You really want to drive that juice, that fruit cocktail character. And so some of our favorite hops in this are obviously the Citras, the Mosaics, but there's also these really cool hops that are newer that I think are going to transform these beers into new avenues, like Lotus, Sabro, Strata. We love Azaka in these beers a lot. Cashmere has been one of our favorites. Some of these hops that when you get them into the right environment with the yeast, they just turn into these very fruit-forward expressions. And so when you're thinking about the hops for these, you really want to focus on hops that are going to have those effects. And there's ways you can look at those when you're reading those hop sheets. You can look at some of the linalool content, the geraniol content, some of the different thiols that are existing in there. So be really mindful of those. One of the big things with these Hazy IPAs is really thinking about the whirlpool element. You're not going to be adding a lot of hops in the kettle, most likely. You still need enough bitterness to balance, but you're taking away some of that traditional bitterness that you might have gotten in that West Coast, and you're focusing it more in that flavor and aroma realm. So you're gonna see bigger whirlpools. You're gonna see that multiple dry hop, whether that's adding it into the fermenter at knockout or potentially just adding it 1 or 2 times during the dry hop. But whirlpool is really important. And on the commercial side, we do a lot with chilling our whirlpool. So we bring our whirlpools down typically into the 180 range. We've gone down to 160. We've heard stories going lower, but you're not trying to drive off some of those more volatile sulfur compounds that make these biotransformative hops unique. That's where we've also taken with some of that whirlpooling idea of getting colder and moving it into the fermenter and just simply adding the hops or the cryo hops, whether they are T90 or cryo, adding them directly to the fermenter when we're knocking out. So they're going into the beer at 65 degrees or 70 degrees and then sitting there while the yeast is getting going and going through its growth phase. And we're seeing some really amazing biotransformation effects. One of the challenges, I think, from a homebrewing perspective with whirlpool versus how we do it on the commercial side is the time. And thinking about how long it's going to take us to get a beer from the whirlpool into the fermenter and how long our hops are sitting on the beer versus how long on a small system they're sitting on the beer. So just for example, a typical whirlpool for us would be, we take it from our kettle into our whirlpool vessel. We would cool it to 185 degrees. Once it hits 185 degrees, we will add our hops. That's when we start our timer for the whirlpool. So if we want 10 minutes of contact before we knock the beer out to the fermenter, we'll start 10 minutes once the hops are added at 185. That knockout for us though can take upwards of 30 or 40 minutes depending on our location. So our actual hop contact time is sometimes 50 minutes. So something to consider as a home brewer when you're really thinking about extracting the flavor, if you're looking at a professional brewer's recipe, is that whirlpool time might need to be extended a little bit to mirror what we're seeing for total hop contact time. The other big difference that you're gonna see with these beers is you really want to emphasize a lot of high protein adjuncts. So there's a lot of different malts you can add in here. Chit barley is becoming a really popular one. Unmalted wheats, flaked oats, flaked wheats, all of them have their pros, all of them have their cons. What we've settled on is unmalted wheat tends to be one of our favorite for a really good stable haze. What we've seen is some of the flaked will fall out over time in the product, which isn't always great. Like you get someone a can, they may be, especially if they're trading this can around the country and they have it a month after it was canned and it comes up clear, it's not desirable. So we found that having unmalted wheat or chit really leads to a really stable haze in our beers. As far as a base malt goes, you want to focus on very light colored base malt. So whether that's a full Pilsner base, a Pilsner in a really low color pale, but you're really looking for ultimately a low color beer. That's what the beer drinker is looking for. That's what the hops are going to express the most over. You're just trying to create a nice, juicy, fluffy mouthfeel to layer in a bunch of fruit and juice with your hops. For more on brewing great IPAs that transcend style, click the link below.